In this section, we'll look at the quadratic formula. For a general quadratic equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, where a, b, and c are real numbers and a is non-zero, the quadratic formula tells us that the solutions of this equation are given by the following. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This formula should be memorized for this class. So please remember the quadratic formula. It can only be used if our equation is in standard form. It has to be ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. And once it is equal to 0, then we have permission to use the formula. If you don't have it in the correct form, you cannot use the formula. Let's try example 1. It says x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals to 0. So it's in that standard form that we want. And so we can figure out what a is. A is the coefficient in front of the x squared. So in this case, a equals 1. The b is the coefficient in front of the x, and this means b is negative 6. The constant term on the right here is c, so c equals a. We can now do the substitution into the quadratic formula. And so we'll write the quadratic formula here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is divided by 2a. So we'll substitute in the negative b, which is negative 6. So this is negative for the negative symbol here. And then we'll substitute a negative 6 for the b, plus or minus the square root. Again, we'll replace this b with a negative 6. Be sure to use parentheses every single time we do a substitution. We'll replace the a with a positive 1 and the c with the 8. And we're going to divide this entire thing by 2 times a. And a is a positive 1. Negative 6, that simplifies. That simplifies to a plus 6. So we'll rewrite this as a plus 6 because of the double negative. Then we have the following, plus or minus the square root, and we'll do each step one at a time. Negative 6 squared, that's a positive 36. Let's replace negative 6 squared with positive 36. And on the right here I have negative 4 times 1 times negative or times 8. So that gives us a negative 32. We can divide that by 2 times 1 or just 2. Let's continue simplifying the radical now. I know 36 minus 32, that's a positive 4. And we can divide that by 2. We're almost done. The square root of 4 is 2. So we have, this is 6 plus or minus the 2 from the square root of 4, and we'll divide that by 2. Now, 6 plus 2 divided by 2 is one solution, and the other solution is 6 minus 2 divided by 2. So we'll separate the plus or minus into two equations. For the first one, we have 6 plus 2 divided by 2, which is 8 over 2. So my first answer is x equals 4. For the second answer, we have 6 minus 2, which is 4. 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. So my second answer is x equals 2. So we have two solutions, x equals 4 or x equals 2. In question 2, there is a difference. We don't have that standard form that we want. We want it to be equal to 0. So I need to move things around. Let's add 3 to both sides so it's equal to 0. And this gives me 3x squared plus 8x plus 3 is equal to 0. This 3 in front of the x squared is our a. This 8 in front of the x is our b. And the number here is our c. I always like to copy down the quadratic formula just so I can memorize it. It's negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Keep writing this formula over and over until you have memorized it. It will help you in the future. So let's substitute the values now. We have x equals negative, we'll substitute an 8 for the b, plus or minus the square root. We have 8 squared minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is also 3. And we'll divide this by 2 times a, which is 2 times 3. Let's simplify the numerator. We have negative 8 on top, plus or minus the square root. Inside the radical, I have 8 squared, which is 64. And then we'll multiply 4 times 3 times 3. That is equivalent to negative 36. It's equivalent to negative 36. And then we'll divide that by 2 times 3, or 6. And so we can simplify this up a bit. We have x equals negative 8 plus or minus. We'll simplify the radicand now. 64 minus 36 is going to give us a positive 28, and this is divided by 6. Now we could simplify the square root of 28. We could use the prime factorization of 28. That's 2 times 2 times 7. And you know we're looking for groups of 2, so let's pull that pair of 2's to the front. So this is going to give us a negative 8 plus or minus 2 root 7 over 6. Now you can't stop here. You have to simplify the expression. Let's reduce the 8, the 2, and the 6 by 2. You have to reduce all 3 by the same number. A lot of students make the mistake of just reducing the 8 and the 6. So I'm going to reduce all 3 of these just to simplify the expression. And so we have our solution now. Let's write it out. X equals, we have a negative 4 plus or minus the square root. We have a 7 left on the inside, and on the bottom we have 3. So this is our solution, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 7 divided by 3. In example 3, we'll have to set it in that form that we want. Remember, it has to be equal to 0 before we could use the quadratic formula. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. This gives us x squared minus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. This 1 in front of the x is our a. The b is negative 4. And the c is equal to 5. And again, recall that quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Keep copying that over and over until you have memorized it. So let's substitute the negative 4 into the equation. There's a negative already, so we have a double negative, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 5. And then we can divide this expression by 2 times 1. So just take your time, substitute it one value at a time. This double negative here becomes a plus 4, plus or minus the square root. We have negative 4 squared, that's a positive 16. Negative 4 times 5 times 1, that's negative 20, all over 2 times 1, or 2. We can simplify the radicand now. 16 minus 20. It gives us a square root of -4. And we'll divide that by 2. Let's take out the I from the square root of -4. So this gives me 4 plus or minus I root 4. We know what the square root of 4 is. That's 2. So I can rewrite I times the square root of 4 as 2I. So let's simplify this. This can be written as x equals 4 plus or minus 2I over 2. You have to be careful. You can reduce all three of these terms here by a factor of 2. And so my final answer is x equals 2 plus or minus I. The 1 in the denominator does not need to be written because dividing by 1 gives us just the numerator anyway. So that's our solution, 2 plus or minus I. Let's look at example 4. If you want to pick A equals 1/2, B equals -1, and C equals 1/3, you would get the correct answer. But do you really want to deal with all of these fractions in your quadratic formula? You probably don't. So what I suggest we do is we can use the LCD to get rid of these fractions in front of our equation. So what we're going to do is use the LCD of 2 and 3, which is 6. Let's multiply everything by 6 and let's see what happens. So we'll have 6 times 1/2 x squared, -6 times x, and 6 times 1/3. And of course, when we multiply by every single term, we even include the 0. 6 times 1/2 x squared, if you were to simplify that, is 3x squared. -6 times x is -6x. And 6 times 1/3, you're just going to get a 2 out of that. So 6 times 0 gives us 0. So instead of using the quadratic formula on 1/2 x squared minus x plus 1/3 equals 0, we can use it on this, which will be a lot simpler. A is just 3, B is -6, and C is equal to +2. Let's write down the quadratic formula, and hopefully you have memorized it already. It's -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's substitute in the b. This is a -6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is -6 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 2. Let's divide it by 2 times 3. And so we can simplify in the radical now. We have a double negative, which makes it a +6. +6 times, or plus or minus the square root of -6 squared, that's a +36. 4 times 3 times 2, that's -24. And we'll divide that by 2 times 3, which is 6. Let's simplify the radicand. 36 minus 4, or 24. 36 minus 24, that's going to give us a +12. Now a lot of students think, hey, we could reduce the 6, and the 12. You can't do that because the 12 is inside the radical. So first we need to break down the square root of 12. The square root of 12 is 2 times 2 times 3. And we're looking for groups of 2. So let's pull that 2 to the front. And so now we can reduce, but we have to reduce all 3. So let's reduce the 6, the 2, and the 6 by a factor of 2. So this is a 3, this is a 1, and this is a 3. So what's our final answer? Well, x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 all over 3. stop here. We can't simplify anything. The radical includes the square root of 3, and there's no way we could reduce to 3 and 3. In the last example, we could use a equals -2, b equals 11, and c equals 6 and finish the problem. Or we could try to simplify before we do that. I can get rid of this negative in front by multiplying each term by a -1. So let's do that. Let's see what happens when we multiply everything by a -1. You don't have to, but it just makes our life a little bit easier. So this becomes 2x squared minus 11x minus 6 equals 0. So now we have a equals 2, b equals -11, and c equals -6. If a is positive, it just makes using the quadratic formula a little bit easier. So we have -b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let's simplify this by doing substitution. We have x equals -11 plus or minus the square root of -11 squared minus 4 times 2 times -6 divided by 2 times 2. So double check the substitution, make sure that's right, and then we can simplify this. We have a double negative, so that's x equals a positive 11 plus or minus. -11 squared is positive 121. -4 times 2 times -6 is a positive 48. And we'll divide that by 4. This simplifies the radicand as the square root of 121 plus 48 is going to give us 169 divided by 4. The square root of 169, that's 13. So we have 11 plus or minus. The square root of 169 is just 13, so I'll replace that with a 13. Let's write a 13 here, and we're going to divide that by 4. Now we have to break it into two equations, 11 minus 13 divided by 4, and the other one is 11 plus 13 divided by 4. So we have two solutions here. The first solution is 11 minus 13 divided by 4, so that's going to give us 2 over 4, negative 2 over 4, which reduces to -1/2. And the other solution, 11 plus 13, which is 24 divided by 4, that's going to give us x equals 6. So two solutions here, x equals -1/2 and x equals 6.